Yes, something I didn't know about at all until it was kind of discovered by his defense team, and then they began to question our mother about it. The MKUltra program was actually a CIA covert operation within the United States where unwitting suspects were made guinea pigs in research about psychotropic drugs, various kinds of psychological pressure. I think there's pretty clear evidence that MKUltra was a program at Harvard. Ted was in a psychological research study run by a psychologist by the name of Henry Murray.
Murray conducted abusive experiments at Harvard under the supervision of Sidney Gottlieb, MKUltra director.
It was a fairly abusive research project. It would certainly not pass ethical muster today. And Ted would meet once a week for a conversation with someone about philosophy, with someone he was led to believe was another subject within the research project, but actually it was a plant. It was a graduate student, and they were actually trying to study how alienated youth, and Ted was identified as an alienated youth at Harvard.
Harvard's entry profile for young Kaczynski: good impression created, attractive, mature for age, talks easily, fluently, and pleasantly, makes friends carefully.
They were actually trying to study how alienated youth, and Ted was identified as an alienated youth at Harvard, would respond to having their philosophy of life and their values challenged.
The Murray-Gottlieb MKUltra objective: behavior modification by covert means through drugs, hypnosis, and torture.
So for 3 years, beginning at the age of 17, Ted was in this study. I've read some of the transcripts, and they were pretty awful. I mean, they included personal attacks. So as my brother's trying to make as some kind of philosophical point, his adversary in this debate is making disparaging comments about his appearance, about his maturity. An interesting possible connection is that Murray had actually been in the OSS, that's right, which was the forerunner of the CIA during World War II, and the projects he did had to do with debriefing prisoners of war.
Paperclip Project: debriefing top Nazi scientists and engineers brought secretly to the United States to work in aerospace weapons, biowarfare, mind control research, and experimentation in the military, academic, and corporate worlds.
So we wonder if, maybe he used some of the same tactics in sort of probing and poking young, unwitting college students, and don't know if the CIA was directly involved, but it's certainly not outside the bounds of possibility. I don't think that necessarily created Ted's mental illness. It might have been a triggering factor. It might have sort of given shape to his belief that there was, conspiracies against him, and that, there was something sinister about the technology of psychology and mind manipulation and so forth. I think I really began to get alarmed in the 1980s when some of Ted's letters to our parents seemed so bizarre. I mean, he'd say that they never loved him and cite evidence and seem to ignore all of the nice and loving things they'd done all their lives long. And I realized at that point that he was looking at the world through a very, very different lens. Looking back, actually having read some of Ted's diaries while he was in college, I think he probably was having psychotic breaks as early as his early 20s. He believed, for instance, that he'd been visited by people in his apartment at the University of Michigan who couldn't possibly have been there to visit him.
Did you ever talk to him about that experience in that psychology program?
No, Mom had remembered it because since Ted was only 17 when he went into this research project, parental consent was needed. And Mom remembered getting a form from, Harvard College asking for her permission for Ted to be in this study. And, Mom said, well, gee, I thought, Ted's, he's socially awkward. He doesn't fit in very well. Maybe being exposed to psychologists could be very helpful to him. Well, little did she know that, this study wasn't conducted with his benefit in mind. The defense apparently put a lot of research into this. It was going to be at least one of their arguments for mitigation, that Ted had been seriously abused in this research program that might even have been funded by the federal government. It was hard to get research, hard to make the connection fully. They found that numbers of the records had actually been destroyed, not for, like confidentiality reasons or something. It was destroyed because there was a congressional investigation of the MK-Ultra program, and the then director of the CIA really, in contempt of Congress, destroyed many of the records of that program.
MK-Ultra records were destroyed in 1973 by Henry Kissinger subordinate Richard Helms, CIA director, in overt defiance of the United States Senate.
They did eventually get to look at some of Murray's private research papers. That was where some of these transcripts were found. They also were able to track down just a couple of the other participants in the study, one of which, by the way, was working at Los Alamos making big bombs. A weird irony of the whole thing. But as far as we know, and we don't know much, Ted was the only one who's, who ended up with real serious problems. In a sense, he wasn't paranoid. He was, he was in a sense conspired against. because of his academic brilliance and his extraordinary success, and the absence of any kind of obvious, any violence in him, I think our family thought he was different, but not necessarily in a bad way.